gut is known in the scientific literature as the second brain. I mean, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, 50% of dopamine. So our happy and pleasure neurotransmitters predominantly are made in the gut.
Let's talk about a dysregulated nervous system. You've said that a few times. That phrase has been thrown around more in the last 2 years than the previous 200, it feels like. And it makes a ton of sense to me, but just so we're on a level playing field and we can, trot this out for our listeners and watchers right now. What do you mean by that? How common is it? And, after you've defined it, then we can get into some of this, the solutions as you talk about breath work, meditation, others.
Sure. So the autonomic nervous system has two main branches that I kind of mentioned in passing, but it has the sympathetic fight or flight response and the parasympathetic, the resting, digesting response, and then the enteric nervous system, or the guts nervous system's the third branch. But they all are important and needed to function. Like sympathetic is not a bad thing. The problem is it's just dysregulated, meaning that the sympathetic is overactive and the parasympathetic is underactive. So when people are, using that term in passing of a dysregulated nervous system, that's what we're talking about. It is like a seesaw where the sympathetic is overactive and up and the parasympathetic is down. That's one way of thinking about it. So a lot of what I'm doing, even from a nutrition side, when we're talking about what like therapeutically to support gut health, in part, it's to regulate the vagus nerve because it's so innervating the gut-brain axis, which the gut is known in the scientific literature as the second brain. I mean, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, 50% of dopamine. So our happy and pleasure neurotransmitters predominantly are made in the gut. So even the nutrition side of it all are predominantly made to regulate the nervous system, which the gut's a major part of the nervous system. And it is. That's what we're talking about there. And we want to gain that vagal tone. So most people have a weak vagal tone, and that's associated in the research to many, many, many things. To answer the second part of your question, how common is it? It is extremely common. It exists on a spectrum. On one end of that spectrum is it's a diagnosis. It's called dysautonomia. It is the nervous system is perpetually stuck in a hypervigilant state where they have heart palpitations, panic attacks. It's associated with things like chronic fatigue syndrome, different autoimmune problems. Not everybody is at that point. But then on the other end of the spectrum, it's the background anxiety. It is trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. It is the heart palpitations that can happen there too. It's things like fatigue, brain fog issues, weight loss resistance, hormonal problems. Those are the earlier stage signs that the nervous system's dysregulated. And we probably have some poor vagal tone that we need to address.
Yeah. When hearing you speak and in reading Gut Feelings in particular, but some of your other work, it just echoes in my head. Like I hear so many people, and I'm like my own experience, for example, with technology always being on and having the hustle culture as a lifelong creator, entrepreneur. I'm so like all these phrases are so like they're everywhere, and everyone I know, and I might actually be able to say that honestly, like almost everyone. I'll say that because I can definitely agree to that. Almost everyone I know has some complaint in the constellation that is our lives of, one or more of the things that you've mentioned in the last like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And yet as a culture, it seems like we're just going deeper into the abyss, and it feels like we're hanging on by threads to these things that can help remedy or rectify us. Now, so question first, are we actually sicker than we were on these axes that you talk about, neurologically, gut, emotionally, which I want to talk a little bit more about? Or is the amount of information that's out there in the world, it's sort of like violence, right? Violent crime is at an all-time low relative to the history of the world. And yet information in the news about violent crime is up, 100,000% because news travels fast and we have information that's packaged and the internet and all those things. So is it a case of it's actually really safe and we just got more, or is it a case of we're actually really healthy, but we just know about all these other things that are wrong with us? Or are we actually in a worse off state than we have been historically?
I think it's a yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think certainly no one can argue we have better diagnostics, more information, more research, more access to information so people can learn more. And what was maybe I think the internet connecting people and raising awareness collectively to know, oh, yeah, that's what I'm going through too. And let's learn more about this so I can find out about it. That's never happened before in human history. So I do think there's a part of a collective awareness to these things. Whereas before it was like, whatever, some random dude on a farm and he was going through something and like he didn't know someone across the country was going through the same thing as him. So there's a certain level of that where I think the zeitgeist and awareness of conversation has it is just better awareness around these type of issues, but it doesn't explain the totality of it. These things, I think, even the most conservative person that looks at the statistics will say these things are growing over time. And I mean, shocking statistics of just even if you look at just insulin resistance alone, like the vast majority of people are insulin resistant, meaning that they're somewhere on that insulin resistant spectrum. Type 2 diabetes is on one end, but things like PCOS in women and weight loss resistance and sort of insatiable cravings and hangriness, that is without a doubt grown over the course of the past few decades. And autoimmune conditions has grown, exploded. I mean, we're talking about 50 million plus Americans that are just diagnosable, let alone the millions more that are somewhere on that autoimmune inflammation spectrum to mental health issues. I think there's legitimate, most people are saying, yes, these things are growing. Yes, a certain diagnostic and access to labs and doctors are part of it that explain the numbers, but not everything. I mean, the shocking statistic that I mentioned in the book is the average high schooler today, the average like child today has the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient in the 1950s. The amount of anxiety in young adults and young entrepreneurs today is shocking. And that was not the case. And even if you also, like, all these things are coming to my mind of food allergies and these food sensitivities issues. Like, you talk to anybody of a certain age, they will say, yeah, there was no peanut allergy or wheat allergy in my school. Now it's like the amount of kids that run to the school nurses because they're seeing all of these allergies and food reactions, it's staggering. So there's some like obvious things if you just look around that this is a new frontier.